big blue button right now, which means we are live. Welcome everyone to a reading with Allegra Pescatore. And let's see, you're doing a reading. That's what's happening right now. We were having such a nice chat and I got a little distracted. I believe Allegra is going to be reading from a book that I have read half of and really can't wait to get back to. But I was in the middle of judging things and so I put it down, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, which is NaCl, was it Eye of the Storm? Is that yes. Which is freaking fantastic. Like I was so enjoying it. It's one of the things I'm like, I had to put it down because I was in the middle of judging stuff for a competition. And I was like, I need to get back to this book. So there you go. Now I haven't read anything for like 6 weeks, but I guarantee you I will be finishing that one because it's excellent. And so I'm delighted that y'all get to hear Allegra read from this title because it's excellent. And that's it. I'm out of here. I'm going to let her finish introducing herself.
Thank you very much, Virginia.
Disappear. Thank you.
All right, folks. I'm Allegra Pescatore. A lot of you know me as that crazy person on YouTube who talks about co-authoring a lot and mice. And but I'm also an author primarily. I write in a spattering of genres all over between science fiction, science fantasy, and most of them are in the same multiverse, so they're all going to connect. I also write with a whole bunch of co-authors, and we work together on all our world building and plotting and interconnecting all these various stories. Now, I was kind of freaking out before I came on here because I really didn't know what to read. I have been having a really hard time health-wise recently, and I haven't been able to breathe because of asthma. And so I was going to read a very kind of sad and depressing thing that I wrote as part of my processing of the pandemic. And then it got late, and I spent all day passing out or nearly passing out because I haven't eaten enough salt, apparently. So I decided that I would get salty and read from my salt book, which is NaCl Eye of the Storm, which is, of course, going to be very blurry because I put my camera on wrong. But NaCl was written with my co-author, E. Sands, and it was written when we were very salty about something. So we posited a world where there was no salt, where everyone was dealing with the same lack of sodium that I deal with on a daily basis. And I'm going to be reading the first chapter from that. If anyone is offended by foul language, this is your warning. Turn away now. But without further ado, this is chapter 1 of NaCl Eye of the Storm. Never trust Mo. Lonnie, day 1. Fuck, flying fucking fuck. Lonnie continued the string of expletives as she watched the white sails on the horizon getting larger and larger, like strangely ominous clouds. If I ever see you again, Mo, I am going to fucking kill you. What the fuck? With a sinking feeling that it didn't matter what she did at this point, Lonnie pulled the rope to unfurl the last of her sails and ran to the ship's wheel to hopefully steer into the wind. Unfortunately, there was little to none of that today because of course there would be no wind when she was being chased down by corporate goons for getting too close to the spire. If she was lucky, and when had Lonnie ever once been lucky, they would be limited by the same lack of breeze, but they probably had electric motors and high-tech navigation software to back up their sails and would catch up to Lonnie within an hour. If that happened, she'd be done for. 200 years of avoiding corporate slavery would be for nothing. And it was all because of fucking Mo and his stupid precog powers. Lonnie should never have listened to him when he turned up and promised her life would get infinitely better if she went to these coordinates by the spire. This was all her damn fault. With a growl, she pushed a stray strand of black curly hair behind her ear and held steady as her sailboat turned into the breeze, picking up a little speed. She straightened out and locked the wheel in place, then ran for the door that led below deck. Still cursing up a storm, Lonnie started shoving the few possessions she wasn't willing to part with into a rucksack before tying it to an inflated buoy. Her small computer, not net-enabled since she'd never been tagged and therefore didn't have an ID, got stripped of its hard drive, and Lonnie realized her hands were shaking as she went to the safe to retrieve what little money she still had. Damn it. Why did this always happen to her? Was it too much to ask to be just be left alone? She shucked her shorts, leaving only the long sleeve swimsuit she had worn under them. With a final curse, she picked up a glass bottle from a nearby bucket and smashed it violently against the floor. It shattered into hundreds of pieces, releasing the infused liquid within that would erase any magical signature she might have left. At least it would if the infuser who had sold it to her hadn't ripped her off. It had taken her 2 years to shake the last tracker who had picked up her scent, and Lonnie wasn't ready to go through that song and dance again. No thanks. Having all the blood in her body replaced had been a shit-soaked nightmare. Fucking Mo. Taking the steps 2 at a time, she scampered onto the deck and glanced back at the boats closing in. They were still following, which erased the last fleeting hope that maybe they hadn't noticed her after all. So much for vain optimism. Heading to the far side of the boat, where they would be least likely to see her, Lonnie searched the horizon, eyes squinted against the setting sun. In one direction, the salt spire rose out of the placid ocean, distant but still imposing. It was usually a sight that fascinated Lonnie, but now she turned away from it, looking the other way. If she wasn't off from her coordinates, there should be some little islands scattered around near here. Once she spotted one, Lonnie set down her pack and started moving about the deck of the ship, initiating the self-destruct sequence for the explosives, placed at regular intervals along the rail. The charges had been standard on smuggler vessels for about 50 years, since it was well known that it was far better to go down to the depths than end up at the spire. Lonnie had hoped she would never have to use them, since it had taken her a decade to earn the money needed to buy this fucking boat. Now, 9 years later, here she was, getting ready to blow it up, her magical signature washed away from even the debris. Each charge began blinking as Lonnie unscrewed the watertight cap and pressed the red button, the "do not press unless this is emergency" button, as the woman who had sold them to her had described it, then went to retrieve the remote detonator. Fuck Mo in the ass with prickly red coral. There wasn't much more time. Lonnie picked up her pack, checked that all her watertight seals were secure, and took one last look at the boat that had been her home for almost a decade. She tried not to think of all the pictures she was about to blow skyward, or the books she would likely never find again, but failed miserably at both. This boat had been her home. After today, she would be without the luxury of one. With a splash, Lonnie and her bag hit the cool water. Dragging the floating buoy painted light blue to match the ocean, Lonnie set out toward the speck of yellow that marked the nearby islet, until she was far enough away from the boat to be safe. Then, without looking back, she pressed the button. The explosion was deafening. If that wasn't bad enough, the wave that rocked into her a few seconds later left her with a mouthful of water and stinging eyes. Here, so close to the salt spire, there was actual salt in the waves. The taste on her tongue and against her teeth was jarring. Oceans weren't supposed to be salty, and the peculiar taste and feel were enough to momentarily distract Lonnie from the fact that most of her worldly possessions were currently on their way to the depths. If only the distraction could have lasted longer. 15 minutes of swimming later, her muscles were sore and the sting of salt in her eyes made them water. She didn't dare stop, though, not when she was sure the Crystal Corporation would still be heading towards the explosion. With any luck, they would be too focused on it and would mistake her for just another piece of debris floating away. The sandy shore of the island was getting bigger, the current working in Lonnie's favor. First fucking thing today, as it dragged her towards the beach, giving her aching muscles a bit of a break. By the time her feet struck the sandy bottom, the two ships had converged on the wreckage. Aware that her silhouette on shore might draw someone's attention, she let herself float in the water, bobbing with the gentle waves as she carefully drew power from the emotive mark on her calf. Don't look towards the island. Don't indulge your curiosity. Carefully, she dampened the curiosity of the people on board the corporate skiffs, then inflamed their sense of fatigue and indifference. Today, you're going to be lazy. Whoever was crewing the ship clearly went down with it. No one sensible would try to swim for shore this far from a major island. Just write your report and go about your business. Not for the first time, Lonnie wished the power of an emotive could force a thought instead of just influencing emotions. At this far a distance and without being able to see her targets, it was hard to be certain that her mark was working at all. But she kept at it, quelling curiosity and heightening laziness for the whole area around the two ships. If there was another motive mark on board who was more powerful than Lonnie, they would feel her messing with their emotions. Once that would have given her pause, but how likely was it that the corporation would have a mark in their 3rd century doing patrols, even around their oh so precious spire? At least it was the winter when her emotive mark was strongest, tied as it was to the 3 winter lunar cycles. This definitely wouldn't have worked in the middle of summer. The sun dipped below the horizon as Lonnie increased the push of her magic, focusing now on their hunger and exhaustion, heightening both in her targets. Channeling this much power was making her already tired body ache and her head throb. She didn't stop. Better to collapse fighting than die because she wasn't willing to push herself. At last, after what felt like hours, the ships began to pull away from the wreckage. Lonnie's breath caught, not releasing until both vessels turned, moving in the direction they had come from. Their floodlights skated over the water away from the tiny island, and the sounds of their motors dwindled. Thank the depths. Teeth chattering and skin wrinkled from too long in the water, Lonnie dragged herself to shore, hauling her heavy pack onto the sun-warmed sand before she flopped down. Every muscle and joint in her body felt as though it had been beaten, and her stomach churned with hunger after using that much magic. Rifling through her bag, Lonnie found a pack of dried fish and tore it open. She selected a piece and started chewing the leathery meat as she looked around. Not much to see. The beach was more of a shoal leading to a larger sandy island. It was small enough that Lonnie could see both ends, though the islet did have a bit of high ground in the middle with some foliage popping up here and there. A few trees nestled behind rocky formations along one ridge, but no habitation and likely no significant sources of food. Would there even be fresh water? What a weird question. Not being able to turn to the ocean to fill her water bottle made Lonnie's skin crawl. Well, there was nothing for it. Nights got cold up here by the spire in winter, and the wind that had been non-existent earlier when she had needed it decided now would be an appropriate time to remind her of what a traitorous bastard it was. She shivered as she stood, wrapping her arms around her chest. It did little good. Lonnie walked down the beach, her sodden and heavy pack sticking to her back, feet sinking into the wet sand with a squelch each time she stepped. She was so focused on the clump of rocks and trees that Lonnie was flying through the air before she realized she had tripped. Coughing up a mouthful of sand and salty water, she rolled over, pulling her suddenly smarting foot into her lap before her eyes caught on what she tripped over. In the dark, it was hard to make out what the thing was. It had been kind of squishy and was lying with one end in the lapping waves and the other on dry land. Lonnie poked at it with her toe and then scuttled away fast on her hands and feet like a crab when it let out an audible and distinctly human groan. What the fuck? Yanking her pack from her shoulders, Lonnie ripped the small waterproof flashlight from the side pocket and risked turning it on to the lowest setting. She pointed it at the groaning driftwood. Two things became obvious at once. The first was that the driftwood was certainly and unmistakably a person, a woman, one with short, sodden black hair and limbs that were far too skinny, brownish gold eyes visible for only a second before she snapped them closed. The second was the pale tattoo around her neck, ending in a barcode at her collarbone, the mark of a Crystal Corporation goon. Lonnie turned off the flashlight and bolted to her feet. She was halfway down the beach, running hard when she realized there were no footsteps following her. Slowing to a jog and then a walk, Lonnie risked a look back. The distant shape was still lying where she had left it. Maybe the woman was hurt? It didn't matter. Crystal Corp goons always noticed when one of their own went missing, which meant someone would eventually come looking for this one. Maybe if Lonnie found a good hiding place, she could just wait until they did and use her power to keep them from snooping. She had done that before. It would all be fine. One last look back, and she continued down the beach. She got about half a mile before a nagging voice that sounded much too like a Mender acquaintance of hers whispered, "She could be dying. You wouldn't let a woman die alone on a beach when you were right here to help, would you?" Why, yes. Yes, she would. A few more steps and how would you feel if you were hurt and someone who could help you just walked away? Besides, there might be a profit to be made. Fuck Mo and fuck Torin too. Precogs and Menders could all drown. Neither had the sense to boil an egg in. So why did her conscience sound like them. She's all alone, just like you. And that is about half of the first chapter of NaCl, Eye of the Storm.
Woohoo! I have to say that I love that opening. I love that whole first chapter, and it made me, I just was like, I have to read the rest of this book now. But I got way farther than that before I had to put it down. It is so good. Like I said, very excited to get back to it.
Thank you.
That was also an excellent reading. You read very well. I love it. I always love it when authors read their own work well, because it's not always the case, but it's lovely when it happens because it's so nice to hear.
I get very enthusiastic. I'm Italian. I use my
hands. It was delightful. We have a few people watching. No questions have popped up in chat yet. If anyone's watching and would like to ask questions, Anita Stewart is saying applause. Yay. If anyone would like to ask questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat, and I will relay them to Allegra. Although you also might be watching the YouTube chat, I'm not sure. But Allegra will see those. And in the meantime, we've got a few more minutes to chat a bit if you want.
Okay.
I have a question, or at least I have some related thoughts that can probably turn into a question if I can get my tired brain into gear. But so we were talking, you and I were talking before we started, and I learned about salt deficiency having a very direct relationship to your life, which I did not know when I started reading the book. And I was just like, oh, this is a really interesting premise. What if a world didn't have salt or had a very tiny amount of salt? And that, so initially to me, I was just like, oh, it's a cool alternate world, sci-fi fantasy-ish premise. I love that it is so directly related to you. Is that a big part of why you wrote this story?
So strangely, I actually started contemplating a world without salt as one of the worlds I would write in before I was diagnosed. I had always spent my entire life. I have very early memories of taking a salt shaker and taking off the lid because I wasn't getting enough salt and pouring more salt on my food, and everyone looking at me like I was crazy. So I started thinking, okay, fantasy is all about world building. And I think that world building that can expand instead of add is really fascinating. So I was like, okay, what can I do? World without salt. Salt is something that we take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Then I put it aside because other things were happening, other books were being written. And Esans and I met and we started writing, and she is also disabled. And when we started writing this, she has MS. I have Ehlers-Danlos with dysautonomia, which is what makes me always have sodium deficiency and always pass out. We really wanted to write a book about a world that didn't have salt. And we wanted to write it in such a way, and we didn't know this coming in, it was very much a later decision. We wanted to write it in such a way that felt like what it feels like to be about to pass out. It's dizzy, it's a little nauseating, it's myopic, and the world is closing in on you. You don't have a whole bunch of information outside. Everything is narrowing to a single focus of getting on the ground or not passing out or keeping the conversation going. And so it's a very different book than others I've written. We did such narrow world building, and our plot, it follows a few characters and you really don't know what's going on in the larger world.
Right.
So yeah, that was it's very much kind of a love letter to my disease and what it feels like.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. The other thing I was going to ask about is probably too spoilery, so I won't ask for that. I was gonna say, we do get a little bit of a larger worldview, sort of, from some characters who have a much wider angle on things.
Yes, there are characters who have a wide angle. Specifically, I would like to talk a little bit, without spoiling, of two characters who are going to be very important to my work going forward, which are Codex and Mo.
Yeah.
For those who have not picked up the book yet, people who do will ask you, have you figured out who Codex is, a lot, because there is a mystery at the heart of NaCl in the interludes between chapters, which starts with an AI waking up and trying to figure out how they died. And who this AI is becomes one of the mysteries of the book. And this was a last minute addition.
Ah, really?
That we were not expecting. That we got our editor came back and said, all these interludes don't make sense. Give them a plot. And so I laid them all out on the ground and said, okay, how do I form a plot? And had to retrofit a plot out of a whole bunch of world building.
Uh-huh. That's cool.
It was a very crazy summer.
That is, I mean, that's actually, so I was like, gosh, this is such a cool device because you've used these interludes to lay out this cool mystery. And so I love that it wasn't the first reason for that. It was originally just world building and then it became world building plus mystery. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was I literally my husband walked in and I had every single interlude printed out on the ground next to me and there were like red thread and he just walked in and then walked out without saying a word. That was crazy Allegra, and he did not interact. And thank you so much because I would have lost the train of what I was doing.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm just picturing that. And I'm also like, wondering, like going through your husband's head could be anything from like, oh God, she's gone down a conspiracy theory deep end or she's sorting something out. And either way, I don't want to know right now.
Yep, he is very patient with my bursts of writerly mania. And the other character is Mo. And Mo is one of the few characters who, from the very beginning, appears in almost all of the books of my larger multiverse. So whether you read NaCl, where he's one of the protagonists, or you read Where Shadows Lie with epic fantasy and dragons and castle intrigue, these characters cross over and they start becoming more and more intertwined as the series goes forward. So it's always very exciting to see the people who start with NaCl going into the other books and the people who start with Where Shadows Lie spotting Mo and being like, what is this person with like ripped skinny jeans and a tablet doing in my epic fantasy?
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I love that. I love the idea of mixing worlds that way, and that's fabulous. That makes me even more excited. Like I've got more than one of your books. Like I have Eye of the World that I've obviously already started, and I have a few more. I think Bond of Thread? Is that right?
Bond of Thread is connected to all of them, but it's end game how you figure out where it is. So
okay. So yeah, I'm excited. I've been excited to read all of them for the longest time, and now I'm even more excited because I love stuff like that weaves all those things together. And we have someone named Jessica has appeared in the chat and says all applause, and also yay Mo, and also she was literally the GIF.
I think the GIF of the person like connecting all the dots.
Oh yeah, right.
Like, yes, that Jessica was in fact around when I was doing that, and I think I came onto a chat one day with literal bloodshot eyes.
Like, yo, I'm trying to figure this out. I've done it. Finally. That's amazing. That sounds so good. There are currently no other questions. We'll give it a tiny bit. Jessica, if you have any questions, although it sounds like maybe Jessica has all the answers.
Jessica is part of AO Collective Publishing, which is our writer group, and they get to see behind the scenes, and we're all working together to build this multiverse.
Nice.
So
I hear an adorable puppers.
Yes, my service dog is very concerned about my lack of sodium and is crying at me to go lie down.
Gotcha. Well, then we will wrap this right up. Anita says, Red Bond of Thread, it's so good, which is a lovely note to end on. Thank you, Anita, so much, Allegra, for reading for us. That was a delightful reading.
Thank you, Virginia, for having
me. I will let you go lie down, and I will end this stream. Thank you, everyone in the audience. We'll see you next at the Epic Series Workshop.